Jung's most dangerous discovery wasn't simply about empathy. It was about a rare psychological fusion, the empathic temperament combined with the INTJ and INFJ personality types. According to Jung, this combination had the power to either break a person completely or evolve them into something humanity had never seen before. In his clinical practice, Jung began documenting what he later called strategic empaths. These weren't ordinary empaths who merely absorbed emotions like sponges. Instead, they combined deep emotional sensitivity with the visionary, pattern-driven thinking of the intuitive NTJs and NFJs. These individuals could read, predict, and even architect the psychological states of others with uncanny accuracy. Jung warned this was dangerous. Why? Because this kind of empath didn't just sense emotions. They could see the entire emotional blueprint of a person, and if they chose, redesign it. That meant they could heal or manipulate with equal ease, depending on intent. Jung eventually gave this phenomenon a name, architectural empathy. And today, we're diving into why. Jung believed these rare empaths could either collapse under their own psychological burden or transform into what he called the sovereign empath, a being capable of reshaping not only relationships, but reality itself. The story begins in 1932. Jung described one of his patients only as Dr. K, a psychiatrist who didn't come to him for mental illness, but for something he called the burden of omniscience. Dr. K was brilliant, but what stood out was his strange ability. He could predict his patient's behavior with almost 94% accuracy. Often, he knew what they would decide before they consciously made the choice themselves. Jung was fascinated and a little disturbed. This wasn't intuition in the ordinary sense. Dr. K demonstrated what Jung later called psychological architecture reading. He could map out the entire structure of someone's psyche, their wounds, their defenses, their emotional triggers, and then, with surgical precision, know exactly which buttons to press to create any reaction he wanted. In his private notes, Jung admitted, "Dr. K has achieved something I find deeply troubling, a complete psychological transparency of others combined with the ability to act upon it strategically." In one session, Dr. K actually told Jung what he was feeling at that moment, traced it back to Jung's childhood, and then predicted Jung's next 3 questions before Jung had even spoken them. Later, Jung confessed he felt like his very soul had been dissected by someone who knew his inner anatomy better than he did himself. But what unsettled him even more was Dr. K's admission. He could easily use these abilities to make patients fall in love, trust him blindly, or even abandon their own beliefs, all by reflecting back their needs in carefully timed doses. For Jung, this wasn't simply a gifted therapist. This was something new, a category of consciousness he had never formally encountered before. Jung eventually outlined what made INTJ and INFJ empaths so unique and so dangerous. He called it the empathic architecture system, which had 3 core parts. First was pattern recognition through empathy. While typical empaths drown in other people's feelings, INTJ and INFJ empaths see emotions as patterns. Jung noted that their dominant, introverted intuition allowed them to trace an emotion back to its origin and then forecast how it would play out in the future. They didn't just feel someone's sadness. They saw the childhood wound behind it, the way it would ripple through relationships, and the exact words that could trigger it. Second was strategic emotional modeling. These empaths don't just notice feelings. They unconsciously build blueprints of everyone they meet. Jung wrote that they catalog behavioral triggers, defense mechanisms, and decision-making patterns with shocking speed. What might take a therapist months to uncover, they could assemble within minutes. Third was conscious implementation. Here's where it becomes dangerous. Unlike other empaths who get overwhelmed, INTJ and INFJ empaths can remain detached. They can choose to use their insight to comfort or destabilize, to inspire or manipulate, all while appearing perfectly natural. Jung called this state empathic omniscience, the ability to see into another person's inner machinery while maintaining enough distance to use it deliberately. Jung also began noticing something eerie. People often felt uncomfortable around these empaths without knowing why. He called this the transparency effect. At an unconscious level, people sensed they were being seen through, that their psychological defenses weren't working. Even if the empath was kind, supportive, and well-intentioned, others still felt exposed. Jung observed that social life depends on a certain mutual blindness. We don't usually see too deeply into one another because it keeps interactions comfortable. But INTJ and INFJ empaths disrupt this contract just by existing. This often triggered what Jung called prediction anxiety. People sensed, without proof, that their behavior could be predicted, and this created a primal fear response. Patients would even accuse these empaths of being creepy, invasive, or too intense. Others, with personality disorders, would sometimes cling to them, sensing unconsciously that here was someone who could see straight through their games. This left INTJ and INFJ empaths isolated, often misunderstood, and caught in a cruel paradox. Their gift had the power to heal others, but it often left them without genuine connection. From his patient notes, Jung identified 4 main paths these empaths tended to take. Type 1, the overwhelmed oracle. These empaths are destroyed by their gift. They see too much, predict too much, and can't shut it off. Anxiety, depression, and isolation often consume them. Jung wrote that many described it as being cursed with sight. Type 2, the benevolent manipulator. Here, the empath uses their power to help, but unconsciously creates dependence. They know exactly what to say, to comfort people, but they weave relationships of reliance rather than real connection. Their shadow motivation is control, even while believing they're only helping. Type 3, the shadow architect. This was Jung's most disturbing category. These empaths consciously weaponize their ability for personal gain. They can dismantle confidence, control partners, or build psychological cages around others with chilling precision. Jung called them emotional dictators. Type 4, the sovereign empath. The rarest outcome. These are empaths who integrate their abilities with wisdom and ethics. They choose not to manipulate, even when they could. Jung called them psychological guardians, people who protect rather than control, and who use their insights for authentic growth. Jung even speculated about the neurological roots of this phenomenon. He suggested that the INTJ and INFJ brain processes information differently. Their dominant intuition creates extraordinary pattern recognition abilities, while their empathic sensitivity provides endless emotional data. Combined with their strategic thinking functions, this produces what Jung called weaponized compassion, an ability to wield empathy as a tool of either healing or destruction. and perhaps most unsettling. Jung believed people instinctively sensed this difference, even when they couldn't explain it. They reacted with fear or awe, as though standing before someone who could reach inside their mind. Jung observed that INTJ and INFJ empaths often faced what he called the isolation paradox. The very abilities that could forge deep understanding and connection also made authentic relationships nearly impossible. People either feared their insight, felt exposed, or unconsciously tried to manipulate them in return. This left empaths in what Jung described as the observer's prison, able to see everyone clearly, but rarely truly seen themselves. Jung also documented the burden of responsibility these empaths carried. Because they could predict negative outcomes and understand the inner workings of others' psyches, they often felt a crushing guilt over events they foresaw but could not prevent without violating ethical boundaries. He referred to this as prophetic guilt, a psychological weight unique to those with architectural empathy. Over time, many empaths struggled with an authenticity crisis, constantly attuned to the emotions and patterns of others. They risked losing touch with their own feelings, developing what Jung termed empathic dissociation. Their sense of self became entangled with everyone else's emotional reality, leaving them hyper-connected externally, but disconnected internally. Jung identified several specific traps that could undermine even the most well-intentioned INTJ and INFJ empaths. The first was the God complex trap, the belief that knowing others' psychological patterns granted superiority and justified interference. The second was the control addiction trap, the compulsion to predict and influence outcomes, rather than allowing people to experience their own growth. The third was the authenticity loss trap, where empaths became so skilled at responding to others that they ignored their own needs and emotions. Finally, the savior complex trap, where empaths use their insights to rescue others from necessary psychological experiences, inadvertently creating dependency and stunting authentic development. To mitigate these dangers, Jung developed what he called the architectural empathy integration protocol, a structured approach designed to help empaths harness their abilities without succumbing to corruption. Stage 1 was shadow recognition. Empaths had to confront the unconscious pleasure derived from influence and control, noticing when their interventions were motivated by ego rather than genuine care. Stage 2, boundary architecture. Here, Jung emphasized what he called conscious permeability, the ability to choose when to engage empathic insights and when to simply be present. This often involved deliberate periods of psychological fasting, resisting the urge to read or influence others, allowing relationships to exist in unconscious naturalness. Stage 3 involved the ethical framework development, guided by what Jung called the healer's code, a set of principles delineating when intervention was appropriate and when it crossed the line into violation of another's autonomy. Stage 4, authentic self-recovery, or empathic individuation. Here, empaths relearn to experience and express their own emotions without strategic filtering, often through solitude, creative expression, and relationships with those capable of seeing their true selves. Jung's study of historical figures revealed patterns in success and failure among INTJ and INFJ empaths. Carl Rogers, for example, exemplified a successfully integrated INTJ empath using empathic insight to guide clients without imposing his own agenda. Eleanor Roosevelt represented a successfully integrated INFJ empath, channeling her ability to read emotional needs into collective social justice initiatives rather than personal relationships, demonstrating how empathic insight can be directed toward systemic healing. Conversely, Jung noted unnamed historical figures who misused their abilities for control, creating dependency, manipulating outcomes, or establishing authoritarian influence over others. Their failure stemmed from inability to resist personal gain, ego gratification, or the seduction of omnipotent insight, which Jung termed the creation of psychological architectures of oppression. Jung emphasized empathic humility as the critical differentiator, the understanding that seeing another's patterns does not confer superiority, and that each person's psychological journey is their own. Successful empaths apply their insights in service of authentic development, while unsuccessful ones impose their perspective or manipulate outcomes for self-interest. Jung also noted that INTJ and INFJ empaths required unique relationship strategies. Safe connections involved partners comfortable with psychological depth, able to maintain boundaries, and willing to engage in mutual transparency. Relationships functioned best when both parties had similar levels of psychological development, preventing inherent power imbalances that could corrupt the empath's abilities. Jung observed that intellectual partnership, creative collaboration, mentorship, and service-oriented connections fostered healthy empathic development. Conversely, relationships with psychologically unconscious individuals often became either manipulative or draining. Jung outlined predictable stages in the transformation from dangerous empath to sovereign empath. Stage 1 was the overwhelm crisis, characterized by flooding from uncontrollable insights and emotional data. Stage 2 was power temptation, where the empath might feel intoxicated by their ability to influence others, often leading to temporary ethical lapses. Stage 3 was ethical wrestling, the pivotal phase, where empaths confronted shadow impulses, developed guiding principles, and learned to act from wisdom rather than ego. Stage 4 was boundary mastery, involving conscious permeability and empathic discipline, choosing when to deploy insight intentionally rather than compulsively. Stage 5 was authentic integration, the point at which the empath reconciles their own emotional truth with their ability to perceive and influence others, achieving the sovereign empath state. Fully integrated INTJ and INFJ empaths, Jung observed, become extraordinary healers, leaders, and creators. Their combination of insight, emotional depth, and ethical integrity allows them to understand human nature profoundly while maintaining boundaries. However, even integrated empaths must remain vigilant against the traps he identified: savior complex, intellectual superiority, control addiction, and authenticity loss. Jung recommended maintenance practices, including solitude, for self-reconnection, creative expression, beyond analytical thinking, engagement with other integrated empaths, and service work that channels empathic abilities toward collective growth rather than personal gain. Jung's ultimate insight about INTJ and INFJ empaths was revolutionary. He believed they represented an evolutionary development in human consciousness essential for the psychological advancement of humanity. These individuals possess the capacity to perceive patterns of suffering and guide others toward freedom while maintaining ethical integrity. They act as bridges of consciousness, capable of translating complex psychological insights into practical guidance for collective individuation, the maturation of societies and cultures toward greater psychological understanding. He concluded that these empaths are not anomalies, but evolutionary necessities. Their danger lies not in their abilities, but in the potential for corruption. When properly integrated, they become the healers, guardians, and guides that humanity needs. The INTJ and INFJ empath embodies Jung's most profound discovery, the power to see and influence the architecture of human consciousness, with the capacity to corrupt absolutely or transform completely. The line between healing and manipulation threads through every interaction, and mastering this balance defines their evolutionary contribution. Jung's research demonstrates that developing empathic sovereignty is not only personal growth, but a service to the advancement of collective human consciousness. If you recognize yourself in Jung's description of the INTJ and INFJ empath, it is a call to cultivate awareness, ethical discipline, and authentic integration, to become a conscious guardian rather than a controller, shaping not only your destiny, but potentially the trajectory of human psychological evolution. If this exploration resonated with you, subscribe now and join me as we uncover more of Jung's hidden insights into the human psyche. Your support helps bring these ideas to light. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next dimension.